Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. This is part 2 of our 2-part series on Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy. If you haven't listened to part 1, that's obviously our advice is to go back to last week's episode. Right, to get you caught up. But we ended Aaron at the wedding, correct?
Yep, we ended at Carolyn and John Kennedy Jr.'s wedding. We're going to pick up in 1996. For our second part, it's going to be a little bit less linear as we're going to cover the years from 1996 to 1999 and thematic pieces and then talk about those final days. So that's just a little caveat at the top because quite honestly, Carolyn's years of marriage were dominated by 3 major items: insane press attention, which we've already seen.
Yeah.
The stress of John's cousin and best friend, Anthony Rudiswell's cancer battle. I even practiced this and I still got it. And the magazine George's failure and John's desire to save it. So each of these items would impact her own mental health and her relationship with her husband, John.
Yeah.
Those are the themes that we're going to cover. So first, the press, which we already...
Yeah, and I looked more at those fight photos, like to see even more of them. And
did you?
We did. If you are following us on Instagram, which hopefully you are, we did post some of those. Yeah, they're not easy to look at.
They are not. They're a lot. And we already talked about how that kind of colored the general public's opinion of Carolyn before even the wedding. So they already had some sort of idea of what they thought that she was. And also as a caveat, I am sick. So if I sound a little husky or
make it a little extra sexy voice.
Yeah, I just wanted to let them know in case it's not ASMRing or what's not if it's the opposite of that. But anyway, back to initially Carolyn and her friends and stuff, they all said that just get married and the press, it'll die down.
Right.
But
now they're not dating and there's not that kind of hoopla of, are they going to get married? Are they going to get engaged?
Yeah. So everybody thought it would die down, but it continued to be a free-for-all. Bonus points if she looked miserable or upset, as they quickly learned that she wasn't going to cooperate and smile and give them what they wanted. So what happens when a woman won't cooperate? Get the next best thing. Shots of her looking angry, upset, to print along side stories about the marriage and trouble.
Exactly.
Which is perfect, especially since that fight in the park, which we already talked about, that gave any story about marital troubles credence.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you already have a foundation. We'll see actually a big parallel with my person, because even though paparazzi is not a thing, but the public image and that idea of how they appear, their outside image, and if you're not like JFK or John Kennedy Jr., who has grown up his entire life basically practicing that, like of either that flustered smile or that just straight face, like it's very easy to have your face come off a certain way, like that you are upset or that you are this and that. It's much easier for an ordinary person. And even if you're not upset, it just might come off that way just by how you're looking.
Yeah, and then it would be, and the speculation was just also insane. When John had his arm in a sling, he had hurt his arm, they'd print stories speculating like Carolyn had caused it. I was reading an article from Vanity Fair, which you would expect more of, and it was from 2003, and it was one of the worst articles I've read about the two.
What was the speculation? That she pushed him and
that it was abusive. And so this is from an article from Vanity Fair in 2003.
That is bizarre.
And they didn't put a caveat, and also 2003, they're already dead, so you would think there would be some sympathy, but this is what it said. One time, John had to be rushed to an emergency room for an operation to repair a severed nerve in his right wrist. He tried to dismiss the injury as a result of a stupid household accident, but his friends knew better. They were certain that Carolyn was the culprit. And that's from a Vanity Fair article. Ugh. I know. And again, that's after she died. So you can imagine.
Right. Use this.
Yeah. With, again, no caveat, no nothing.
Right. Not like it was speculated that.
Yeah. It just said,
comes off.
They knew better. They
Right.
knew better. They were certain. Yeah. Just gross things like that. And the photographers, which we talked a little bit about in the first half again, they'd just stand outside the building and scream at Carolyn, call her every misogynistic name in the book. And I always think of, did you watch the Harry and Meghan documentary series?
No, I haven't yet.
Okay. There's a part where Meghan mentions, it's right when she started dating Harry, and all these paparazzis were outside her house in Toronto, and it was just all these men, and she talks about calling the police, and they said basically because of who you're dating, they couldn't do anything. And it reminded me so much of this, because if it was anybody else, you would consider it's stalking, but
right, or harassment and
her, yeah, they're just supposed to accept it
like 24 hours a day,
new way of life.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said that where they lived, there wasn't like any doormen or
no.
Like
so
that.
John, yeah, when Carolyn moved into John's loft, he didn't have any doormen or anything like that. So yeah, they would always be out there from the moment, anytime she tried to leave. Like anyone in the situation, she just started going out less and less. So she was starting to become reclusive, obviously suffering from depression.
Yeah, bad for anybody's mental health.
Yeah, but people just clung to the idea that, oh, she married, America's hottest guy, and now she's nowhere in sight. I've showed you like some of those articles about it. Like one of them's The Lady Vanishes. And yeah. And she went from being annoyed at the press to being really scared.
Yeah, like, again, thinking Princess Diana.
Yeah. And there will be a Diana reference because that really unnerves her. But yeah, she speaks about she's being chased by a wolf pack of photographers, grunting and groaning and pushing. They're practically on top of her. And that's every time you leave your apartment. And then there's the sad irony where, because she didn't go out a lot, it made every time she did
more. Yeah,
like
she made photos more rare.
Exactly. So she was a hot commodity. But yeah, it's just a catch-22.
Right. It's like you go out a lot. Would that make the photographers go away more? Probably not.
No,
or
still, yeah,
right.
They still wanted that money, especially after that park
and the park,
that made them so much money. So people wanted more.
Right. They wanted to be the next person who got those shots and made that money. But then, on her end, it's I don't want to even go out anymore. What's the fun in going to see a friend for happy hour when you're literally, going to be chased down the street by especially men and all times of day.
Scary. Yeah. Right. I remember reading, and I didn't put the story itself in my notes and stuff, but like her being in like an elevator or something, and they're all like on top of her, and she's like towering and stuff. It's just terrifying. And like you said, anytime she would go out, she'd be followed, she'd be stared at. People would come up to her and say ridiculous things.
Right.
It just, for somebody who loved going out, it just wasn't the thing. It wasn't worth it anymore. And
I always get, just for a quick kind of side note, I always get like really sympathetic for people like this. I know, like, if we're comparing it to the Harry and Meghan piece, a lot of people are like, they chose that life of public service. Like,
you're on, I have.
Yeah, that's like, they're like, it's their choice as an adult. They married to this family. They need to expect this comes with it. And I just don't believe that. I don't believe that you should have to live your life in harassment and fear and just being constantly surrounded by paparazzi that you can't.
Yeah.
You can't live your life.
there's a trade-off, and John would talk about how his mother would do what the royals do and give him a good picture, and then they'd leave him alone. But that's not what they were doing in the 90s.
No, it's a totally different era.
Yeah, this is, before and a little bit later, not in the 90s, but in the 2000s. That's when like Prince Harry and some of those other celebrities got hacked. Their phones got hacked and all this stuff. There was no stopping them at this point. And yeah, again, there is a trade-off for having that life. But yeah, like you said, I feel like the women always bear the worst brunt of it because you get all that misogyny and
tied to it.
I think that's a huge thing with Carolyn too, because there was also a lot of people who were jealous. She got the man and they didn't like that. And then,
it ruins that story of, again, this playboy, JFK Jr. Who's he going to marry? Who's he going to pick? Yeah, now you're looking for a new story, a new angle of a happy marriage splashed on the cover every week isn't going to sell newspaper or papers. It's like, it's either pregnancy, like speculation, or
they're
falling apart.
You're already gay.
I know.
You know what's going to happen.
I am a woman. I understand what.
Like you said, Carolyn, she's about 30. She's lived a relatively normal life. She used to be able to go out with friends, socialize, be the life of the party. She loved. That was like her thing. She thrived on it. And suddenly her freedom's restricted. Like I said, she can't go out unless she's getting stared at, pictures, all that kind of thing. And living under a microscope is so difficult, and it's difficult to adapt to. And John was understanding at first, but then his patience starts to wear thin. He literally goes, I can't come home and talk about the cat and dog all evening, he reportedly said to a friend.
Yes.
And of course, many of the books and articles I read were not very generous and understanding either. All of them written by men, and some of them by John's friends. They said how she loved the fame and glamour that came with being the wife of an American prince. But one of them, quotes, she claimed not to have anticipated the intensive media scrutiny.
I don't think you can. Like, even when Meghan does that and like people want to be like, yeah, right.
You can expect something. Yeah,
it's hard to totally get picture in your brain, and especially an ordinary person.
When it's all negative, because I do think a lot of the Meghan and Carolyn comparisons are really apt, because it would be as if you're just getting an onslaught of just negative, everything, made up stuff. And a lot of, I'm sorry, but especially these friends of John and stuff, it's like you have no idea. Even John, he was in the spotlight his entire life. He had 30 plus years to manage through it.
That's all he'd ever known.
Yeah, and we only see her in year 1 through like 3 years. She was adapting. And again, he had the added benefit of being a man, and a very attractive man. So
right.
No one knows what it's like to be a woman in the middle of that kind of storm.
Right. And one who had over time built a relationship with the press. And so they weren't looking, if anything, like I said, they were protective. And I think even looking at Meghan, who obviously was an actress, so she had some level of fame, and obviously not anywhere near that same paparazzi amount. But I just can't imagine going from totally ordinary citizen into this, again, basically royalty of the United States, like one of the last families that
I can't think of any other parallel. There's no other parallel besides the.
I mean, maybe the notorious of the Trump in a bad way. You know what I mean? But the name that carries. If you say, I'm a Kennedy.
Yeah, I really can't think of any other parallel. And then, of course, this is also where we start to see the drug rumors, because the press was determined there must be a sinister reason that she was being so reclusive. And I'm like, which there was. It was you. The call was coming from inside the freaking house. Yeah.
So she must be using drugs. I feel like that's like the opposite, especially like in the 90s. It's like party drugs.
Yeah, cocaine, which is what they say about her. So there's constant rumors in any mainstream book, too, that you read. they talk about it and they say it like fact that she was like self-medicating with cocaine. But most of the people who truly knew her said she did pot every once in a while, but she didn't even drink to access. Although you'll love this. Her favorite cocktail of choice was a dirty martini.
Ooh.
Hey, girl.
Yeah, I like that.
For those who don't know, I think you spent one summer like
I did perfecting the recipe. And now I like don't, I was thinking about that today. I was like, do I want a dirty martini? Now I like, since that was right before I got pregnant with Harper. And then since then I like haven't been into them. But yes, I did. I found the perfect ratio. It was quite good. My mom was requesting.
Carolyn would have loved it. But yeah,
we could have been besties.
Yeah. But I'm like, so every book you read says that she was self-medicating and stuff, but her friends saying, no. Is it possible she was doing drugs? Yeah, it was the 90s.
Sure. But was JFK Jr. ever accused of that too?
Yeah. In the same articles and books that say she's a druggie, they'll mention that, oh, John used cocaine occasionally. But of course, they don't dwell too much. The double standard,
right? It's like a bit like it's like a businessman, and
yeah, of course he did cocaine. Yeah. It was the 90s. I do tell Matt, my husband, that like anytime he talks about the 80s or 90s, I'm like, you guys were all just doing coke. But yeah, so they do say that while also being like she was so drugged up and all this stuff, but by all things that we can tell, at least from the people who really knew her, it doesn't sound like that was what was going on, what she was depressed. And it just makes my blood boil to think that she was suffering through that and people were calling her drug addict and all that stuff.
There's basically no ounce of sympathy.
Yeah. And then, of course, I did my next note was the bump watch, which you already called.
Yeah.
The Daily News, June 1997, had the headline of John to be Dada.
Gross. Ew, I hate every part of that.
And it said, we wouldn't blame him if he was disassembled a bit this time around. Kennedy does his best to keep media aggravation of his sometimes moody wife to a minimum. Following reports of the pregnancy rumor yesterday, camera crew were massed around his doorstep.
Shocker.
So, yeah, like they actually say in one of the articles that the press would have like lenses on her dyed hair because they would be able to tell if she was pregnant and not dyeing it. They would just be constantly watching that. And then another point was that John and her went to a White House screening of the movie Air Force One hosted by the Clintons. Yeah. And she couldn't even have candy because she said that the press would think of it as like a sign of pregnancy. So she turned down some goobers because, I'm like, eat that goober.
You know, or just drink some. I'd be like, here's your sign.
Oh my God.
I just can't imagine like them looking at like my hair. I'm surprised they weren't like digging in the trash for tampons.
Oh, I'm sure
like that. Or tracking her. Like,
I wouldn't put it past them at this point.
They're like, oh, she's due. Her period.
Yeah, tracking her cycles. To be fair, like having a family was a big contention in their relationship. So John was eager to start a family. Carolyn had reservations about bringing a kid into this media storm. She could hardly leave the apartment. Like, how is she supposed to add a kid into the mix?
Yeah. How do you even go to like all the appointments that a newborn needs and all of that?
Yeah. And then
how would that be healthy for her or the baby?
Yeah. She was like, I can hardly go out on my own. I'm going to have a stroller on the street as these photographers try to tackle me. No.
Yeah. So, did they ever, or was there any thought, or did you read anything about them ever considering leaving New York and going somewhere like remote?
Yeah. So there was some consideration. They loved traveling, especially to Europe, and Italy was a favorite. But in terms of somewhere else in the U.S., Carolyn felt trapped because John loved the city. He loved the energy of the city. So she felt like he was not going to leave. So that kind of led to a similar sense of being trapped, because that's where he wanted to be, but that's where the press was.
Right. Is that where George Magazine, I'm assuming, then was also headquartered?
Yeah. And that's a good segue because, again, in terms of the kid thing, she also didn't want to have a kid at that point because John was so focused on George and she already had so little of his time because things were not going well there. Like the initial buzz, the magazine had faded, the sales had started to drop, and there was a lot of tension between John and his co-founder, Michael Berman, which would entangle Carolyn as well, of course. Who do you think that Michael blamed for the problems between him and John?
Could it be a certain blonde woman?
I would say yes. Very Yoko Ono.
I know. It's very much.
Yeah. We already saw when they did the launch, he was angry because the proposal had leaked. So he had already blamed her for that. And he didn't like Carolyn coming into the office and befriending the staff who adored her because she was such a people person.
Right.
They talked about the Christmas of 1996. She went out and bought thousands of dollars of curated gifts for each person. She was the master gift giver. And Michael read these gifts as a threat, like the Kennedys were trying to sideline him.
So gross.
And he obviously didn't know Carolyn because that's just what she did.
Yeah, it's not a new thing. And that's, I think, what would be so, I guess, frustrating, but I don't even think frustrating is the word. Is like she had that aesthetic eye, like she is talented and was helping.
She's trying to help the magazine.
Help her husband, and that's seen as
a threat
or like okay, now you guys, it's two of you versus me. One.
Yeah, she didn't need to do that, but she wanted it to be a success because she knew how much it meant to John.
Right. I just feel like guys automatically start being like, I'm now outnumbered, or she's whispering in his ear. It's totally, again, like you already mentioned Yoko Ono. It's that
it's such a Yoko Ono kind of thing. Yeah, they had already had tensions before between the two of them, and they had an actual physical argument between John and Michael, which resulted in Michael leaving the magazine in 1997. But with so many eyes on the magazine because of JFK Jr.
Yeah.
It was just another disaster. And of course, the press had a field day blaming Carolyn for it. That same Vanity Fair article that I referenced earlier, basically says she ruined John's relationship with Michael Berman with her constant meddling. But it seems clear that relationship had run its course and it was going to without Carolyn or not.
Right. Yeah. She was not the main player in that breakdown of that relationship.
Yeah. I just love when big, strong man, you're going to blame a woman for carrying it apart.
It very might have been in Michael's eyes, it's easier to blame his wife than to like be introspective and also think about,
definitely.
What were the contributing factors like between everything? It's much easier to be like,
crazy, he married Carolyn and then everything changed. Yeah, exactly. So while John was throwing himself into George, especially after Michael left, Carolyn turned her focus to John's cousin and best friend, Anthony, whose battle with cancer seemed less like a battle at this point and more like a ticking timer that was rapidly running out. Every time he was in the hospital for surgery, Carolyn would bring a picture of their dog and put it above the bed. That was like their little ritual. So she'd bring it in, and she always accompanied Carol, Anthony's wife, to the hospital for surgeries, appointments. That would be like a constant for the next 2 to 3 years. She said,
that's incredible.
And she said, I'm the only one without a life. It's easy for me to go, she reportedly said.
That's sad, but
I know.
That's deeply sad for me as somebody who's very tied to my career and had to give it up just for a few years. And the idea she had to give up her career forever, and even knowing how hard it was for her to leave her place, I accompanied them to every appointment and everything like that. Like she's subjecting herself to that each time. So that's how much she cared.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is how much she cared. And that is classic Carolyn, which we saw in part one. She loved to do that for people she loved. And her and Carol, Anthony's wife, would become super close over the next 3 years. Appointments, hospital stays, all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Carol and Carolyn, God damn it. Carolyn was there every step of the way. And there's this one touchy moment that I had to put down.
Is it going to make me cry? I'm going to cry.
Maybe. They were at the hospital. So Anthony was there, and Carol and Carolyn were staying there, and Carolyn laid out the clothes for Carol and even blow dried her hair for her because she just wasn't taking care of herself. But of course, then you think of the amount of time and effort that Carolyn threw herself into caring for Anthony and Carol that couldn't have added to her own stress levels at the time. So you're thinking
that's so stressful enough. You're taking on somebody else's, like your friend
who's dying. Yeah, that's the kind of person she was. I think that summarizes her more than anything else. You know, they were her family by marriage, but not blood family. But
she's not obligated to do any of this.
Yeah, that's what she wanted to do with her time. And it felt like the closest thing she could do to be productive, even as things like even the Washington Post dared to ask, what does she have to do? What does she do with her days? When she did have a real difficulty in trying to figure out how to spend her time. One of John's longtime assistant and friend, Rosemary Terenzio, she'd go on to write her own book, and she basically was like, Carolyn still hopes to return to a career, but what? There are a lot of stipulations, not to mention Carolyn's high-profile presence would have disrupted most offices. She had her charities, but we also have to remember at her death, she was just under 3 years into her marriage. She had no idea that her life would be so short, so she was taking her time. She was considering what she wanted to devote her time to.
Right, yeah, you don't need to jump in day one of it's, especially as a young person. She's young, trying to figure out, okay, yeah, what do I want to do next with my options? Okay, as a public servant, what is that going to look like on my end? What can I be happy with?
Yeah, and she even thought about maybe even going back to school to get a master's in psychology because she knew that like she had that like superhuman ability to bond with people and know what they needed. Another idea was perhaps working on documentaries with Carol, who had been a journalist before her marriage. There was a lot of things that she wanted to consider. She just wanted to do something.
Oh, I'm sure. For somebody who is as driven as her, I can't imagine. Yeah, just that. Just wanting to lounge and just, again, take all the Kennedy money. That's not
who she was. And now we've reached, as you mentioned, the Princess Diana of it all. So in August 1997, when Princess Diana died, this did a number on Carolyn's psychology. It really unnerved her. This was her worst case scenario.
Yeah.
That's what she feared. Reportedly, she watched coverage all the time, and John told one of his friends, I'm not sure what I'm going to do about Carolyn. She's really spooked now.
Yeah, I can't imagine already having that level of stress about paparazzi, and then you see another figure literally killed
that same
because of one of the consequences of that.
Yeah, and that's exactly. That's what she had feared all along. People are trying to tell you're crazy, but it's not that bad. And then you see that, right? It's no wonder that she became obsessed with that. Yeah. So I think that really is a turning point. And of course, there was always a comparison of them.
Yeah.
Newsday compared them and said that that Carolyn resembled Princess Diana, and they were both somewhat beaky blondes.
Oh.
And then, if the tabloids are to believe, she's also high maintenance, prone to depression and flakiness.
Oh my gosh.
I know. My note on that was just blasted into the sun.
Yeah. Prone to flakiness. Ugh.
I know. Like, that's what we're going to do, but the 90s tabloids. Okay, we're going to get some moment of levity, because I know it's been like just one crappy thing after the next, but I don't think we should just think of her last year as like one tragedy after the next. Yeah, there were moments of lightness.
Mhm.
I love there's stories about in the city, Carolyn, because she couldn't go out, she turned a makeshift parking lot into a dog area. So she'd hang out with friends and their dogs, where they'd hang out and chat. Of course, it had to be shut down a little bit in when the paparazzi figured it out. But for a while, they could just hang out with the dogs and
Little makeshift dog park.
Yeah, she loved animals. Well, this was perfect for her. And then even at Hannahsport and Martha's Vineyard, where John and her would go, the daughter of their house manager at Hannahsport, Ariel, has these amazing stories about Carolyn. That's in that new Carolyn biography, Once Upon a Time.
Mm-hmm.
She said how Carolyn was like the ultimate big sister. They'd go shopping at the mall with Carolyn buying, of course, and talk for hours about school, boys, all the fun stuff that teenagers like to talk about.
Just being that listening ear and basically validating that teenage experience. Now, I'm the wife of a Kennedy. That's so
why are you talking to me? That kind of thing. No, she said they'd like stay up late on the couch talking. Carolyn and I would yammer well past midnight until we'd hear John trudging down the stairs. So yeah, she talks so much about it, and
at the door.
There's a lot of stories about her and Carolyn that are well worth reading that book for. So I did want to share that. And then in early 1998, Carolyn's big sister, Lauren, she's one of the twin sisters who are a year older than Carolyn. If you don't remember, she returned to New York City to live.
Oh.
So yeah, she had been in Hong Kong, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, she'd been working at Morgan Stanley, and she was just as smart, charismatic, and caring as Carolyn. But yeah, she moved back to New York City after living in Hong Kong, and she ended up moving just like a few blocks away from Carolyn.
Oh, that'd be so nice and reassuring.
Yeah.
Just to have that family.
Yeah.
Actually, you said they were close, right?
Yeah, they had been close for their whole lives, but just having somebody that close that sometimes Carolyn would stay over there and they grab lunches, brunches, drinks, all those kinds of things. It feels so reassuring that when Carolyn needed her sister most, she came through.
Yeah, that's very touching and basically helping her feel less isolated.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I feel like. So many of Carolyn's actual friends were doing whatever they could. Again, whether doing a makeshift dog park or her sister moving back, doing whatever they could to get her out of this funk, this rough year, 2 years of marriage and adapting to public life. Carolyn and Lauren had also begun to start spending more time with their biological father. Just as a recap, their parents had divorced when they were young. So Carolyn had never had an easy or consistent relationship with her birth father. John had encouraged her to reach out and nurture that relationship. So that was starting to become something that Carolyn was nurturing and adapting to. And as much as the expectations of being a Kennedy wife weighed on her, despite everything, the press, the stress, Carolyn still did attend events at John's side. I don't want you to think that it's not like she wasn't going out and attending fundraisers and all those galas that a Kennedy wife would have to attend. She was still doing that. However, she might have felt about it. She showed up for him. I'm not quite as sure that he did the same thing for her. Like when they were dating, he had a tendency to work late, go to the gym, anything but be home with Carolyn.
Not very respectful of her time.
Exactly. So that's why
little self-centered.
That's why she started to stay at Lauren's house and such, just to give it back to him and be like, hey, you're not taking, I don't want you to take me for granted.
Right. I don't want to be home all by myself all night. I'm going to go over and hang out with my sister.
Yeah. And he would say, I'll be home for dinner. And then he wouldn't. That kind of thing. And it was always George and John entangled as always. Carolyn still felt abandoned as her husband tried to save his sinking magazine. She knew that he had to do it, but that still didn't make the abandonment feel any better.
No.
I was going to read a bit from that Once Upon a Time, the new bio, because I think it does such a good job of sort of the dynamic of describing why things between John and Carolyn were strained at the time. It says what Carolyn hoped for in John with the care and attention reciprocal to what she had been giving him. Instead, John's tunneling forward very well could have felt like abandonment she always feared. As a response to that fear, she not only withdrew from the world, she withdrew from John. He had a tendency, like always, anytime he had stress in his life, he'd just like barrel forward, so much energy, and she had the opposite.
Sure. He's like that workaholic. I'm just going to put everything into it, but at the expense of my relationship.
Yeah, and he didn't want to think about Anthony dying. He didn't want to think about George going under, so he just put all that energy towards it. But I'm even going to say that, as bleak as it sounds, if you read the facts going into 1999, things were actually pretty great between the couple. Whether it was time or the couples therapy that they had started to do, Carolyn was in a much better place. Carolyn and John had traveled to Italy in March of 1999, one of their favorite spots. Hey, me too.
Yeah, I'm sure I'd be really happy.
Yeah,
the couples trip to Italy.
Yeah, a little Italian vacation would do us all good. I think that should be like, screw antidepressants, prescribing a trip.
Yeah, right. Please, all my insurance cover that.
Insurance cover a trip to Florence. That would do wonders for my depression.
I'll be like, I have treatment-resistant depression, so this is the only thing that's going to work.
But it was one of their
I can joke about it because I have depression.
Yeah. Same.
I can joke about it. Yeah. Not being cruel.
No, guys. We're both medicated depressant. Yeah. They attended the White House Correspondents' Dinner in 1999, and shocked, she was starting to smile at photographers, which people were caught off guard. She was seen chatting a lot to actress Claire Danes. Cute. She must have been a baby.
Claire Danes have been
in 1999.
Yeah.
White House.
Yeah, like probably early 20s.
White House reporter Helen Thomas said, and this is going to be very poignant. I'm sorry, I'm just reporting the facts. Helen Thomas said, they never looked more content and in love than they did that evening. I thought, my God, this is Jack and Jackie all over again, isn't it? It really reminded me of the old days, the so-called Camelot days. I am going to send you a picture. Do you have your phone near you? Awesome. I'm going to send you a picture of one of their more famous pictures from that evening. I will send it.
These are going to be better pictures than the last one.
Yeah, it's much better. I just sent it. It's one picture. Okay. It's a really famous one of them.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that one.
You want to describe it?
Yeah. He's behind her, or at least it looks like they're sitting.
I think so.
Yeah. Like lounging, and she's kind of casually lounging like her back into him, and he's kissing like the back of her head. She's got a little kind of fly, coy smile, and he definitely look very happy and in love.
Yeah, it's one of the more famous images.
It's
Again,
very
we'll post
beautiful.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you look it up. But yeah, they looked beautiful and in love. Although I do love when they're like, this Jack and Jackie all over again. I'm like, guys, you would have thought that we'd dispel of those rumors at this
I
point.
know, seriously.
Yeah, but I get, yeah, the Camelot days. And Carolyn was back at John's side fundraising with George to keep it afloat, even if it meant public appearances. She did it. A photographer who covered a George fundraiser in May of 1999 said, I could see that Carolyn had finally reckoned with becoming a public figure. She was at ease, and she and John looked as happy as they'd ever been. So that's May of 1999.
And that makes sense. Early marriage, when you're not a celebrity, is hard. Early first years of marriage, and then you add on everything that they were going through
and adapting and all that. Yeah,
death of his mom, get all those things are hard on a marriage to a normal couple. And then you're talking about mom, Jackie. I know that was before the wedding, but on the relationship.
And all these things that we're talking about, the George magazine, Anthony's cancer battle, all that stuff was pre-marriage too. So it's holding over and casting a shadow on the marriage.
Yeah, it doesn't start your marriage at this perfect thought. You're coming in with all this, I don't want to say pain, but there's
so much stress.
Right.
How can you even concentrate on the actual relationship itself?
Right. And to be fair, 3 years in, to be starting to really basically be a Kennedy, I'm impressed by that. I'm impressed by that.
And as we said, John had been in the spotlight his whole life. The fact that she's starting to adapt to it at this point, like you said, that's pretty incredible. That's a lot to adapt to. On Memorial Weekend of 1999, John broke his ankle paragliding.
They didn't blame that on.
No, but for someone who thrived on and needed activity, always on the go, this was a disaster. And Carolyn knew it. She was on the call with her friend Carol, and she said, "We cannot afford to be careless now. We simply can't manage anything else. 6 weeks in a cast." He knew that 6 weeks in a cast for John would be really painful. That meant he couldn't fly. He couldn't do any of his activities. He'd just get restless. So this cast a long shadow over June into July of 1999. Whatever progress had been made in the early month 1999, things seemed to backslide at this point. Carolyn was starting to withdraw again. John, too, was feeling the stress of it all. His marriage, George, Anthony's cancer had even begun working on Anthony's eulogy. One of John's friends put the stress in perspective. John had gained weight. He looked tired. His hair was noticeably grayer. So things are back to being stressful for our couple.
And that's hard because, like you said, for somebody who almost needs that or that physical activity or even a hobby like flying to come down, decompress, and can't do those things. Yeah, it is going to really affect.
There's no outlet.
Right.
No outlet for it.
Right. And that is going to affect, obviously, everything around you.
Yeah, which is what Carolyn was saying when she talked to Carol. She just knew that without an outlet, he would become restless. They would be fighting more, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So every article or book you read about them has a different idea where they were at in their marriage in the final months and days. Some say they're on the brink of divorce. Others say it was just a rough patch and they'd come out of it like they always did. There's just so much to disentangle, and it almost feels like a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, I don't think you can, unless you're part of that relationship, even if you're a friend, unless you're part of that relationship, you really grow. Yeah.
You had rumors of cheating on both sides, accusations of drug addiction on Carolyn's side, if you believed Michael Burgeon, her former boyfriend. we talked about also.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Yeah, he said that Carolyn was involved in an affair with him right up until her death, and that John had found out. Gasp. Yeah, we talked about him and his account in part 1, so I don't want to rehash that.
Right.
But her closest friends refute that.
Yeah.
Some of John's friends said that Carolyn had stopped having sex with him. The point is that I most want to get across was that John and Carolyn had real issues to resolve, but there was still so much love there. They were in couples therapy in 1999. So at least on the surface, they both wanted to work on things.
Yeah.
Some friends said that they were talking once again about having children. So to me, it seems like it wasn't the end if you're talking about having kids again.
Yeah.
Yeah. They loved hard. They fought hard. That was their dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah. And this was a hard time in their relationship. It sounds like just another one of those up and downs.
Yeah. I just think, who's to say if they would have lasted if given the chance? None of us know. They were at odds over at least one other thing. That July of 1999, there was an upcoming Kennedy wedding on Saturday, July 17th to attend. Rory, the youngest daughter of RFK and Ethel, was getting married at Hyannisport naturally, considering I think RFK and Ethel had 11 kids. I'm like,
I know,
when wasn't there a Kennedy? I'm like, when wasn't there a Kennedy wedding?
I know, I can't imagine. Ugh.
Thank God the Kennedys are rich, because can you think of the amount of money you'd have to spend on wedding and wedding presents?
Yeah, and I just can't imagine as like a family member being like, oh, another one.
I have to go again.
Right.
Yeah, didn't we just do this? Carolyn did not want to go to the wedding. She had actually already called Ethel and told her she would not be there and gave her regret.
Oh.
But Carolyn knew, as did everyone around them, that the press would have a field day if John attended the family wedding alone.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, and the press didn't need any more ammunition to use against her. So ultimately it would be that pressure, it seems, that forced her to change her mind on attending. John had been staying at the Stanhope Hotel near his old childhood home after one of the couple's fights. And he met up with Carolyn, her sister Lauren. They're at the hotel for lunch. Lauren was there as a mediator. Lauren forced them all to hold hands and asked them what each of them needed. John said he needed Carolyn to go to the wedding. Carolyn still was not backing down. Lauren asked her what would make her change her mind. Ultimately, it was decided that Lauren would go along. She could see friends at Martha's Vineyard, and she was also dating a Shriver at the time, so it worked out well. Yeah.
Okay.
If people don't know, the Shrivers are related to the Kennedys, so they're all,
It hurts my heart, though, knowing that.
I know. We're going to be the tough part. Sorry, guys.
I hate, just to think of how those little decisions come back. And
Lauren reportedly said, come on, it'll be fun.
No.
The plans were set. John would fly all three in his own plane with Carolyn accompanying him to the family wedding, and Lauren would be there for emotional support and her own fun at Martha's Vineyard. John had started flying lessons over the course of the marriage. Jackie had never been keen on John flying, which you can't blame her if you look up all the instances of Kennedys dying in plane crashes.
Oh, really?
Oh, you didn't kick Kennedy?
No.
Even Ted Kennedy, he didn't die in one, but he had a really bad plane crash.
I think I've heard about that, but I guess I didn't know. But
I would just think, now we're doing like a history timeout. How did Joe Kennedy Jr. die? I think he died in World War II from a plane crash.
I knew he died. I thought he died. Yeah, died in the war, but I don't know how. But I just would think
he was a land-based patrol bomber pilot. I'm going to count that.
I would think points to Jackie, just of those small aircrafts seem like they go there all the time.
They always, I just saw something in the news about one. Yeah. And Carolyn also said, with this family's history, John is the last person on earth who should be piloting his own plane. And Carolyn even enlisted Ted Kennedy, John's uncle, and Caroline, his sister, to dissuade him from flying. But John was a risk taker. He'd always been. He'd like to take risks. So he didn't heed the warnings. And to be fair, Carolyn did acknowledge that it allowed them to be able to travel without the press following their every move.
Right.
So before the wedding weekend, John would continue to stay at the Stanhope Hotel. There are reports that his ex-girlfriend and former model Julie Baker was spotted entering the Stanhope after midnight, the same night as the lunch with Carolyn and Lauren.
Okay.
Yeah,
Don't love that.
no, we don't. Obviously, no one knows besides her and John what happened. Did he cheat? Was she just there for conversation? They did say in the books that his female friends were the ones he seemed most able to confide in emotionally. I don't think it's insanely naive to think she was just there to talk, but I did want to throw that out. And
yeah,
apparently,
how much credence,
you're
I'm pondering, like, how much of a rumor was it? Or was it
that she was there?
Yeah.
I don't think it's much of a rumor. I think
It's confirmed.
Yeah. So
Just what she was doing there.
is, a lot. There's back and forth between John's friends. Some of them are like, that wouldn't be against him to have done that, to have cheated. But then other ones saying, no, they were close friends.
And he was leaning on her.
Yeah, so she hasn't said anything about that. Yeah, and said he was going to stay at the hotel to force Carolyn to work on their marriage, although we already know that they were doing so. They were in therapy and so on. Carolyn was with him, too, on that Thursday, July 15th, the day before they were to leave for the wedding to get his cast removed, finally, from the accident. And they say that apparently they were in great spirits. They were kissing in the reception area, which is hot.
Yeah. Right.
Not all doom and gloom.
Right. We're clearly not staring at each other, arms crossed. Not.
Yeah, and she didn't have to be there to get his cast removed. There is that. And there's just so much wasted potential in their story. Here's one of them. John had also confided in some friends about finally taking up the Kennedy mantle and going into politics.
Yeah.
There would be a governor's race for New York in 2002 that he was eyeing if he could get the George mess taken care of in his marriage. And we've now reached July 16th, 1999, which would be the final day for Carolyn, John, and Lauren. There is this enduring idea that Carolyn delayed the flight to Hyannisport because she kept having her pedicurist redo the color to match this very specific light lavender swatch.
I thought I read somewhere that it was the sister that delayed because of
Yeah, you see mixed things, but
that she was like late coming back from work.
No, I mean, at least in the ones that I saw, it didn't have anything to do with Lauren.
Okay.
Because Lauren and John end up going to the airport together and Carolyn went separately. Yeah, so Carolyn, you always see this story about the pedicurist. It's in that damn Vanity Fair article I keep referencing. I think that seems to be the origin of it because they talk about it as if a source of it being some hairstylist who said they sat next to Carolyn. But yeah, you see it repeated everywhere. But there are also reports that insist she did leave the pedicure at 5 p.m. to go to Saks Fifth Avenue to pick up a dress, a black YSL dress, naturally, for the wedding, and ended up leaving the city at the same time as John and Lauren. There's an enduring idea that Carolyn delayed the flight to Hyannisport because she kept having her pedicurist redo the color to match this very specific light lavender swatch. You see this repeated breathlessly in books and articles. That damn Vanity Fair article. It seems to be the origin of it, the source of it being a hairstylist who supposedly say that they sat next to Carolyn that day. But then there are reports that insist she left the pedicure at 5 p.m. to go to Saks Fifth Avenue to pick up a dress, a black YSL dress, naturally, for the wedding and ended up leaving the city at the same time as John and Lauren did.
Okay.
The pedicure story seems like it's something that people want to believe if they have the idea of Carolyn in their head as this vain harpy that somehow lured a Kennedy into marrying her.
Yeah.
It fits so neatly into the bitch narrative, so I'm not even going to engage in it.
Yeah. I think it's not even worth it.
I would rather focus on how she went to Saks and was supposedly a sweetheart to the sales girl. Carolyn would never be caught dead mistreating a retail employee, and I think that tells you everything you need to know about her.
Having her, even though obviously it's high fashion retail, like she clearly had an understanding for retail workers. And
oh yeah, there's a story earlier where she had gone into a store and a couple of girls had started to mistreat the sales girl, I think trying to be impressive to Carolyn because they knew who she was. And afterwards, Carolyn was nice to the girl. And then as soon as Carolyn went home, she went home and bought some flowers and had flowers sent to the sales girl. Yeah. When the sales girl at Saks wished Carolyn good luck for the weekend, Carolyn reportedly replied, "Thanks, I'm going to need it." Normally, it would take about 45 minutes to get out of New York City to Essex County Airport, where the trio was flying out of. However, with horrible traffic that Friday, the three of them arrived around the same time at the airport, around 8 p.m.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were leaving later than expected, but at least it would be a quick flight. Before they left, Carolyn called Carol Ridziswell to let her know that they were on their way, as Carolyn and John had planned to see Anthony and Carol after the wedding.
Okay.
Anthony only had about a month left to live, it turns out, and they all knew they could feel the time growing short and wanted to make the most of it. Of course, in the end, Anthony would be the one burying his friends. Yeah, the plane took off at 8:38 with dusk hitting around 8:58.
Okay. How long of a plane trip is it supposed to be?
I can't remember, but I think it was something like
I would
hour.
Yeah, I would assume.
Yeah, I think they were expected around 10 or so, or before 10.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like maybe about an hour and a half or so.
Okay.
So about 7 miles from Martha's Vineyard is when the plane crashed.
Oh, they were that close.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell too much on the details of the crash because they're easily accessible for those morbidly curious, which I am, and I've read. So.
I know I've read a lot on it, but yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to do with the
plus, yeah, and I feel like what people know about Carolyn is always the crash, so that's the piece that I didn't want to focus as much on, but I do want to address it. The cause of the crash was there's a thick fog off the water combined with it being nighttime that made John disoriented. It's called spatial disorientation. Just means the pilot can't tell which is up or down because of the fog in the night. They can't see land or stars.
Ugh.
Yeah, and if a flight instructor had been on board, they likely would not have crashed. Worse yet is knowing that one of them did offer to fly with them that night. John had declined the offer. And if he had used the autopilot, that would have helped too, which he did not. So, yeah, if this offers any solace, not sure it does, but, all three did die on impact. Survival in that instance would have been virtually impossible. Hitting the ocean at that kind of speeds, like hitting concrete. They were all still found strapped into their seats. John was 38 years old, Carolyn 33, and Lauren 34 years old at the time of their deaths.
I can't imagine Carolyn and Lauren's mom and sister.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna do a lot. I don't want to dwell too much on it, but so when they didn't arrive, obviously that's when the calls were starting to come in, and by early morning, the Coast Guard search and rescue had begun, and Carol Ridziswell, Anthony's wife, had to call both Caroline Kennedy, John's sister, who was in Idaho with her family, and then she called Ann Freeman, Carolyn's mother. Anne Freeman, Carolyn's mom, asked heartbreakingly if anyone else was on the plane with Carolyn and John. She apparently had not known that Lauren had accompanied.
No.
But then when Carol was silent, Anne started screaming. Yeah. And there are two memorials for the pair I want to highlight from the memorial service. First, Ted Kennedy, John's uncle, gave the eulogy for John. It's worth reading the whole thing, but the small piece just like really hits home the tragedy of it all. He said, "We dared to think in that other Irish phrase that this John Kennedy would live to comb gray hair with his beloved Caroline by his side. But like his father, he had every gift but length of years."
Oh.
And then one of Carolyn's friends, Hamilton himself, he highlighted her fire and fierceness in his eulogy. "When she was your friend, it was like having a lion in your life. She was protective of her cubs, and woe to anyone or thing that would do them harm." At the service in Greenwich, Carolyn's hometown, the Rolling Stone, "She's a Rainbow," was played to commemorate the two Bassett sisters. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and the Freemans, Carolyn's family, and the Kennedys had their own tension after the crash and all that stuff. But they eventually won a suit against the Kennedys, but nothing would bring Carolyn and Lauren back. And now
the Freemans did sue.
They did win. Yeah. Yeah. But
wrongful death.
Yeah, because people don't like to say it or dwell on it, but it was John's fault. There were things he could have done. He also wasn't completely certified, I believe. He was a few hours short.
At a flight at night or whatever.
Yeah. So there were things that he did that caused their death inevitably.
Right. Raised the risk.
Yeah. And obviously Carolyn's afterlife has taken a life of its own. I just feel like her being married to a Kennedy, and it just seems like she's always an afterthought. Even when you talk about the death, it's always, oh, JFK Jr. died young.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people don't realize that Carolyn or Lauren were on board as well. That's like their collateral damage.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. The focus obviously is on the Kennedy curse.
Yeah. The Kennedy curse and being like, oh, it's so sad he died young, which it is sad. He was 38. That's still young, but I feel like she gets forgotten amidst all that. And even if there's been some softening towards her, like in the same thing that happened to Princess Diana, there's still this nasty current of misogyny surrounding her, which we talked about at the beginning of our first podcast about why I wanted to do at least scan of the comments section, which I sent you some.
I was so shocked. Aaron sent me some. I guess I thought, especially because of the manner and the early death and how much time has gone by, that the vitriol would be like not there. I thought it would be very much sympathetic, and I was blown away by some of those comments.
Yeah, one of them was just like, cocaine was a hell of a drug. I'm like, you sucked.
You have to say,
yeah, every derogatory name that you call a woman, she's been called. Blamed for the plane crash, blamed for marriage troubles, blamed for everything that was going wrong in their lives.
Yeah.
And it just seems like even more reputable sources, like some of those books, and a lot of them are written by John's friends, just feel like they can't help but getting digs in at Carolyn, like repeating that same gossip about the cocaine, her temper, those kinds of things.
And they're still written again from this perspective of John.
Yeah.
Or not John himself, but that circle, not her circle.
Exactly. And that's what I think the latest book is good at, focusing on her friends, what they thought, not just what some of John's friends some of them were, not her greatest fan. So, you know, and there's always that common refrain, which we talked about, of someone with all the money and advantages in the world at that time could possibly be so depressed and unhappy. You know, again, the same shit they pull on Meghan Markle. Like, she married a prince. Why can't she just be happy?
Yeah, she's a princess. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I did also just want to say we also chatted a little about the TikToks and all the recreations for the style.
Yeah, ghost. I've seen ghost influencer. I hate that.
Yeah, but it's also a large part of those recreations are taken from paparazzi pictures. So the same people who made her life a living hell, which is very problematic. So I did want to bring that up before we close out.
That's an interesting thing I didn't even think about. So I think
all those street style. Yeah, it's her style on the street, but she's being followed by a gang full of paparazzi.
Right, who are making her life miserable. Villain or not, both of us are clearly Team Carolyn.
Yeah.
I don't think she's any more villainous than any of us would be. I think I would be a much bigger bitch if I had married a Kennedy.
I would be insufferable. They would have hated me.
Right.
I would have given them.
Yeah, I don't even want to do the scale because I think it would be the same as anybody, like a 2%, 3%.
But I do think that I think she's worth revisiting.
I think it's really important, though, that you bring up that with the ghost influencer piece and the fact that she's still worth revisiting because she has, based on that article alone, there's still so many people who villainize her, especially in comparison to her husband, who's given a pass. So even though I think it's clearly she's no more villainous than any of us, if anything, way better of a friend.
I know. I not that I expected her to be somebody I disliked, but I was surprised as I started actually disentangling it how much I liked her.
Oh, yeah. When you were telling the story, I was still picturing a little more of a, not cold, but just more introverted, high. I thought maybe she had been a model before, and then I knew she had worked with Calvin Klein, but I guess I thought she was more like the modeling side.
High maintenance,
right. Yeah, I wouldn't have the stories that you shared. I think really helped give us.
And that's just a sliver. There's so many more. So sources. There's like I said, that new biography, which you've seen a lot of the new articles are coming out because of the new biography, which is Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy. And then I also had previously read The Life of John F. Kennedy Jr., America's Reluctant Prince. And that one, it gives good background on him, but it repeats a lot of the same narrative about Carolyn, about her being a junkie and the cocaine and all that stuff. But I think the new bio has done a really good job at, I don't want to say whitewashing because
humanizing.
And her friends, so many of her friends sharing the Carolyn that they she knew. That John's friends have spoke a lot about her and about him, and it's their turn. So we stand Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy here.
Definitely worth the two-parters. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah.
That was had really very little background knowledge of her as a person, just tangential, obviously, to the plane crash and all that. I really appreciate, and that, as I said, I didn't even know the anger at her still today. I think,
and I'm sorry for being such a down episode, but guys, it's really hard to make all this.
Right.
I'm only reporting what I know.
Next week probably won't be too much. Next week we can harp on the men in the story are like the ones I think who deserve
we love. We don't love men. We love harping on men. And we love some men.
And joking about things like that. But yeah, my choice is also not the lightest one to talk about. I'm like,
do you want to do a preview?
I have previewed a little bit. Check out Instagram. You'll see some clues. They're the real. I also somebody who's been very little reported on. The book biography I'm reading on this person said, despite this person's notoriety and huge part in history in the 19th or 20th century, they've only had 2 biographies at that time. This book was published in 1994, published about them.
Oh, wow.
which is mind-boggling and
Banana.
also not surprising because when I started my research, like I couldn't find even good articles that focused on this person. And I think we're going to see obviously in an early 1900s version, but a lot of you're not dealing with the paparazzi, but you're dealing with the public and how they interpret certain things, whether it's facial expressions or all of that. So I think we will still see some parallels. And it probably will also be a two-parter because there's a lot.
I know. I was like, I can't believe. I was like, oh, second part's going to be less. Nope. Girl can't edit. Your girl can't edit.
Yeah. Again,
If you like longer podcasts, welcome.
Not spoiling totally my person, but if you're on Instagram, you'll see ties to the Russian Revolution. Like, I can't talk about this person without talking about some context. So,
mine, if I did that, it would be like a 4-parter.
Yeah. But you gave enough context of what was happening at that time.
Thank you.
I have to disentangle my person from 2 other people who are more prominently featured in the story.
I think that was also the thing about Carolyn, is I feel like there's still so much that I could go into about some of John's stuff at the time, more about George, but I really wanted to focus on her because she's always the co-star. She's never the lead. So I really didn't want, I'm sorry, John, you're hot. People love you, but it's not your story today.
Right. First, if you can be following us on Instagram, that's a great place to start. We have reels and things that give a lot of previews or extra information we can't always put into the podcast. And then, of course, to listen to us, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It really helps us if you download, if you can. Or follow. It's really nice to see a general idea of how many people are out there. And as we alluded to last podcast, our Ted Dan and our
Mick Jaggers.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Keith Richards. Hit us up.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everybody. This has been Ambivalent Offenders, and we will see you actually in a few days. Yeah, next week / in a few days.
Yeah.
Yep. Bye.
Bye, guys.